Hello, I'm Dr. Walter de Casaretti. I'm the director of the Research Center on Violence at West Virginia University. This video is sponsored by the Big 12 Conference. The Big 12 is deeply concerned about sexual assault and other crimes on campus, and this video is one small part of a larger attempt to curb some of society's most compelling social problems, especially sexual assault on the college campus. Approximately 1 out of every 4 women on college campuses across this country and in Canada will experience at least one type of sexual assault in their academic career. This is very disturbing. It's even more disturbing when you consider that some campuses have rates of 30%. We knew back in the 1980s that at least 1 out of every 4 women experienced at least one type of sexual assault. We fast forward to 2021, and it seems that the problem is only getting worse. And therefore, the people featured in this video were called upon to discuss new directions, new innovative directions in curbing sexual assault on the college campus, as well as hate crime, physical violence against women, the offline victimization of women, including image-based sexual abuse. We're going to hear about pornography. We're going to hear about the role of mainstream media. We're going to hear about diversity, the need for programs aimed at addressing the diverse nature of today's college campus. We're going to be focusing on race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, the role of men. Men are extremely important in the struggle to end violence against women. Extremely important. If men are part of the problem, they have to be part of the solution. And so some of the strategies you'll be exposed to in this video will focus on the role of men. I'm going to begin on that topic by focusing on the issue of male peer support. Male peer support is one of the most powerful determinants of sexual assault and other types of violence against women on the college campus. What is male peer support? Well, it's a concept that I developed back in 1988, and it refers to attachments to male peers and the resources they provide that encourage and legitimate various types of violence against women, including those that occur online as well as those that occur offline. So what we have found with over 35 years of rigorous quantitative and qualitative research is that the men who are most likely to abuse women on the college campus are those who have friends that do so and who have friends that encourage the abuse of women. Many men belong to what we refer to as hypererotic subcultures that place a very high value on sexual conquest as well as the domination and control of women. So what we have found is that the men who are most likely to sexually abuse women are those who have friends who they perceive as having more sex than they actually are having. And so what these men experience is what we refer to in sociological terms as relative deprivation. In other words, they feel they're not getting as much sex as their friends. And thus, they're more prone to engage in sexual assault so that they can say they've had sex. Many weekends feature heavy drinking, and on top of being intoxicated, the goal is sexual conquest. And if men do not have sexual relations, these men that belong to these hypererotic subcultures, I mean, if they feel they didn't get, or if they didn't get sex that evening, the evening is seen as a failure. And again, over 35 years of research consistently shows that the men who are abusive have peers who do so. Not all men are abusive, but again, the men who belong to these subcultures are the ones who are most likely to engage in different types of violence against women. So in terms of policy and prevention, it's absolutely essential to focus on peer relations. Less than 10% of men who abuse women in any way suffer from some type of personality disorder or any other type of psychological disorder. Most of these men are actually conformists. It's the men who don't engage in sexist behavior, some argue, are the deviants. Given the high rates of sexual assault that you've been exposed to by me and by others, it's really a widespread problem, and it's not surprising that you have these peer groups that encourage and legitimate violence against women, and we have to target the peer group dynamics. How do we do that? There are a number of ways, and it's beyond the scope of my segment of this video to go into great detail. There are a number of programs available. I urge people to turn to organizations such as the White Ribbon Campaign, and they can provide valuable resources, manuals, and perhaps assist in the development of workshops aimed at getting men involved in a grassroots individual and collective struggle to end violence against women. Throughout this country, Title IX offices are actively recruiting men to be part of the solution. This is very, very important, extremely important, and that's where we really need to move even further. We need more good men involved in initiatives. There are a number of things that you can do individually and collectively. Develop education programs, set up displays in student recreation centers, hold town hall meetings, create videos like this one, create Facebook pages. These are just small pieces of the puzzle. There are other things that one can do, and some of the participants in this video will be giving you some more concrete examples. So I urge you to share this video with others, post it on social media, show it in your classrooms, show it in your community centers, and be part of the solution. Don't be a bystander, be an active participant. We need to grow. This movement has to become stronger, and I'm sure it will. And my colleagues featured in this video will provide some very novel ways of doing things to improve the quality of life on campus and elsewhere. Thank you.
The need for prevention programs to raise awareness to combat sexism in mainstream media is important because sexism affects us all and is pervasive. Sexism is any expression, whether shown through an image, action, or word, that some persons are inferior to others based on their sex. And while it overwhelmingly affects mostly women, girls, and femmes, sexism can also affect men and boys, particularly when they do not conform to stereotypes of gender roles. And this impact can be further harmful whenever we take into consideration factors such as ethnicity, age, disability, social origin, religion, gender identity, and sexual orientation. Any effort to combat sexism in mainstream media must take into consideration the various platforms such as social media, print, television and film, and even music, as well as the various forms that it may appear in. Sexism may look like sexualized depictions and commentary of women, girls, and femmes. It can also look like victim-blaming rhetoric and behavior, or even having roles and positions filled by men and boys. It can also be stereotyped and toxic portrayals of masculinity and male culture that glorify masculinity and gender roles, such as men and boys don't show emotion or wear particular attire or even colors. Or it can also be justifying phrases like boys will be boys, all the while criticizing and trivializing behavior that does not fit the stereotypes or norms that are associated with masculinity. It is dire that we understand that language and communication shape our behaviors and thoughts. And while these individual acts of sexism in these various forms and platforms may look less severe, they actually aid in the creation of an environment that in a climate that is ripe with fear, intimidation, and insecurity. And this can further develop into an acceptance of violence, particularly against women, girls, and femmes. It can also affect us more internally by producing thoughts of worthlessness or avoidance behaviors and strategies. It can also deteriorate our overall health and impede in social, economic, and cultural participation in opportunities both presently in our life and also in the future. Many organizations and programs have missions, goals, and even values to support and care for others so that they may prosper and lead lives that are free from harm. And this can be achieved whenever we address sexism in mainstream media. It may look like petitioning publishers, cable networks, and producers when you see sexism and its associated violence, or even venues when you see upcoming speaking engagements or events. It can also be calling out rapes and sexual assaults that are phrased as being sex, or even demanding more inclusion in roles and positions. It can also be challenging the deeply entrenched gender stereotypes, toxic masculinity, and unconscious bias that provide limited and unrealistic ranges of what are deemed to be acceptable whenever we're talking about activities, traits, occupations, skills, and even clothing, and even items such as clothing or gifts. We have tools to affect change in our spaces, and we could use them better and more frequently. And one of these is channeling our collective power. In raising awareness and publicly combating sexism in mainstream media, we not only make it known that these expressions are not tolerated, but we also let those who are being targeted by sexism that they have networks and resources that are there to support them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dr. Gail Downs, and I'm going to talk to you briefly today about why we need anti-porn education in violence prevention programs on campus. So let's look at why I'm arguing this. And the main reason is that porn constructs cultural notions of femininity, masculinity, sexuality, gender equality, relationships, and intimacy. It's not just images of people having sex. It tells a much bigger story. And what we know now from studies is that pornography is the major form of sex education for boys and men all over the world. This is why we need to talk about pornography in violence prevention programs. Pornography today is affordable. In fact, it's free in most places. It's accessible and anonymous. They are the 3 A's that drive demand, which is why we see so much demand for pornography today and why it has indeed become the main form of sex education. What we know is that porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. So this is no small industry. This is a huge multinational industry. And of course, the absolute example of this is Pornhub. Pornhub is the most visited porn site in the world. And Pornhub statistics from 2019 tell us that they had over 42 billion visits in 1 year, daily average of 100 million visitors, nearly 1,000 searches a second, uploaded nearly 5 million new videos, and created over 1 million hours of new content. That's just in 1 year. They have recently taken down some of the content because of an investigation into them, but there's still millions and millions of free videos up there. What we know also from studies is of the most popular scenes, 90% contained at least one form of violence against women. Now, what are these forms of violence? Gagging, that's gagging with a penis so far down the throat that the woman chokes. Strangulation, which is hands around the throat. Often in pornography, I have seen women pass out and then Also, when I was teaching feminist theories courses, my students were telling me that they had been in sexual encounters with men, often hookups, where they had been strangled during sex, again, almost to the point of passing out. Very, very brutal, rough anal sex, ejaculation on the face. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a porn scene where it's not ended in ejaculation on the face, and often multiple men. Hair pulling, spanking, spitting in the face. So your average porn scene that men and boys are learning from is women being orally, anally, and vaginally penetrated by 3, 4, 5 men. Yes, because there's often 2 penises in one orifice, where she's being called a bitch, a whore, a cum dumpster, being slapped, spat upon, and then they ejaculate all over her face. This is a form of violence against women. It is violence against women in the actual action and in the consumption, because what you're seeing is a documentation of violence that happened to that woman. We have over 40 years of peer-reviewed research that shows the harms of pornography. I'm not just making this up as I go along. I've been studying the effects for well over 30 years. And as I say, 40 years of research. Let's just talk about some of the porn myths about women, because this explains why it's so important to include anti-porn education into anti-violence training. So the main myth about women: all women are always sexually available to men. That's a lie. Women like it rough and hard. Myth in porn, but it's a lie. Whatever he does to her, no matter how violent and degrading, she loves it. That also is a lie in real life. Even if she says no, she really means yes. In fact, very rarely do they say no in porn. She's always saying yes, 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 give it to me harder, even if she's in terrible pain and you can see it on her face. And the overall message that women exist to be used, abused, and thrown away. That are the key themes that pornography tells men about women. So this is what you're learning from pornography. But what does it tell men about men? It tells men that all men get off from sexually brutalizing a woman. Actually, that's not true. It says, and it reduces men to life support system for an erect penis. Well, that's not true. Men are worth much more than that. But if you want to find anywhere that really hates men, go to pornography. And hates women, of course. Men have no desire for connected and intimate relationships. And in fact, in pornography, they don't even have the capacity. Again, a lie in real life, but that's what porn tells you. And it says men who want equal relationships with women are in fact pussy whipped. So any man who wants any form of equality is pussy whipped, not a decent human being who believes in gender equality, but is in fact pussy whipped. So we have studies that show that the health effects of men of using pornography include difficulty with intimacy, more likely to include coercive tactics such as sexting, increased engagement in risky sexual behaviors, in sexual harassment, rape. Men themselves suffer from increased anxiety, depression, habitual and addictive use, and increasingly we're seeing erectile dysfunction. So my message to you is this: to all men out there, be a revolutionary. Refuse to collaborate with the porn industry. And to women, I say, be a revolutionary. Refuse to hook up or date men who use porn. Let's take this away from the pornographers and instead define your own sexuality. You have the right to be the architect of your own sexuality, not the porn industry. If you want to learn more, go to culturereframe.org, where we have lots of interesting statistics, articles, etc. up there. I hope you take this very seriously, because it's about time we stop the power of the porn industry to define what sexuality should look like. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Akia Carter-Bosman, Prevention Specialist for Title IX and Equity Assurance here at West Virginia University's Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I also use she and her pronouns. One of the things that we often talk about in prevention education is the inclusivity or equity for all people to be able to seek assistance for things like stalking, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and even sexual assault and harassment. But one group that is often forgotten are marginalized students. A lot of times our primary prevention education is lacking in diverse and equitable solutions. It is only targeted to heterosexual, cisgender, white females, or targeting white males who often are the perpetrators of many of these incidences across campus. It is vitally critical and important that universities begin to engage their marginalized populations and student bodies in this prevention education work, but also in the education around violence prevention. One of the issues that happens is that Black women and Asian American women and Latinx women and Native American women are often the subjects and targets of harassment, bullying, they're over sexualized, but none of the research and none of the programming that's happening on a lot of campuses are focusing around those issues that they face. And so therefore, students don't often come forward and participate in our prevention education programs in many of our schools around the country. Why? Because they don't see themselves reflective, one, in the data, but they also don't see themselves reflected in something that people care enough about them to be able to address them and provide resources that are unique to their situations. Many of our students of color often have barriers that are invisible for other people, right? Because it's not their reality. Some of the barriers could be policing. So we know that communities of color oftentimes have a sordid relationship with police. Therefore, they're not really going to come forward for an investigation or go into, maybe walk into UPD to report an assault or some sort of harassment or discrimination has happened to them, all because of the way they feel like they may be perceived or treated. So one thing institutions can do is to start to look inward at their prevention education. Look at how equitable it is. Yes, we have equal access. Any student can access it. Any student can request a training. Any student can come and get information. But is it equitable? Are our students of color, primarily our BIPOC and Asian American and Latinx students, are they reflective in our data and research? Are they reflective in our programming? Are we talking about issues that primarily affect them? Even thinking about our LGBTQ student population, are the scenarios that we're using in our prevention education reflective of some of the issues that they may face or some of the situations they may find themselves in? Are we talking about transgender individuals and how they are 10 times more likely to be assaulted, or how they're more likely to not be believed just because they're transgendered? Prevention education is the key to preventing interpersonal violence on our campus and gender-based violence. But if it's not reflective of those who are non-white, heterosexual, or cisgender, then we're not doing a very good job. And so moving forward, institutions really need to look at, take a kaleidoscope view and see what are the different areas that they're forgetting about, what different shades and hues are not included in their primary prevention education, but also how do you begin to engage those populations that have been marginalized for so long, who are the victims of the systemic and institutional oppression that leads to things like, again, sexual harassment, assault, the objectification of their bodies, and even more or less the harsh discriminations that they face on a day-to-day basis. If students of color do not see themselves reflected in prevention education, then the bottom line is they just will not participate. Thank you.
I believe we need to engage students in direct, peer-led prevention education, and that it should be a central part of any strategy to eliminate sexual violence on college campuses. Now, my belief in this proposition really hinges on my own personal answer to a pretty simple but important question. Is our primary need at this point additional prevention programs, or is it instead a deep and abiding need for a prevention movement? Now, I'm squarely in the second camp, and not because I don't value the prevention programming that I myself deliver or that my great colleagues deliver. I do value it. I just don't think it's sufficient. Moreover, because it feels so practical and manageable to do, we sometimes think it's the only thing that we can accomplish. We assemble a group of prevention educators or some like-minded professionals. We develop a PowerPoint and discussion questions and all of this great stuff. And maybe depending upon the size of our campus, we reach a few thousand college students every year. And we get so lost in the churn of what we can personally accomplish, that we forget to expand that notion of we to begin with. Now, sexual violence on college campuses is obviously an enormous problem that has created incalculable human suffering. And so my argument essentially is that we need to have solutions that meet the size and scope of that problem. We need to expand our notions of who the we is in addressing this issue. Now, I want to make a moral argument for including students here, but I also want to make a practical one. The moral argument is pretty straightforward, and my background's in social work, so this is kind of a first principle for me. That we cannot do good community organizing without the involvement and direction of the community we are trying to work with. Moreover, even if we could do community organizing that way, we shouldn't. Because a top-down effort is likely to be blinkered or ineffective or paternalistic or worse. And so we have a moral obligation to involve the populations that we are trying to organize or we are trying to help. And who are those populations? Well, really clearly, that's students. So if we can have students doing peer education, I think there is a straightforward moral good. I also think there are strategic and practical reasons to do this. I want you to picture any successful social movement in recent history. Go ahead, do it. Chances are you are thinking of an historical moment that was propelled substantially, if not entirely, by young people and their ability to imagine a wholly different society, a wholly different world. They are not encumbered needlessly by what already exists or by how we already do things. And I feel this all the time, more and more with each passing year, actually. And when I'm working with college students, they often see possibilities that I fail to realize. And, in my better moments, I might describe my own view as being somehow more practical or more strategic, and maybe sometimes it is. But sometimes I just lack imagination. Sometimes I just lack vision. And the students I work with never have those important assets in short supply. And I think that's a really important part of an effective social movement. But I also think there are other practical reasons to involve students. Consider the recent innovations in inclusivity and preventative work that younger activists have really pushed for successfully. Consider how important it has been to broaden our discourse to make sure it is more inclusive of LGBTQ plus survivors, or of applying an anti-racist lens to talking about sexual assault prevention. So we're not treating potential survivors as a kind of monolithic population that face no other kinds of discrimination, indeed that have no other different kinds of identities. Those innovations are incredibly important. And they came from, largely, the pressure of younger activists. And so being continually able to solicit this kind of input from college students and to hear what they say without feeling defensive, I think is a crucial part of this work, because there are likely things that I don't see right now and that I really need to see. I'm going to learn that from students in the future. The next strategic reason why we should be involving young people has to do with the kind of intervention we're often trying to engage in. We're often asking for bystanders to step up and help, but all of the ways in which a bystander can be helpful are purely contextual. And who understands students' social context better than students? They come up with the best solutions for, say, talking to their roommate about a sexist joke they just made, or helping a friend who's in a high-risk situation. They come up with the best solutions for these things. So not only is there a moral imperative to engage students, but I think that there is a practical one as well. Yes, we should do our own preventative programming. We should work our fingers to the bone at solving one of society's most pressing problems. But we also need the humility to engage directly with the population we are trying to help.
Hello, my name is Gail Caputo, and I'm professor of criminal justice and the founding director of gender studies at Rutgers Camden. I'm going to talk to you about queer communities in campus sexual assault intervention. We know that queer students in particular are harmed in multiple ways and at different points in their lives compared to other students. We know that this population has unique stressors and reactions to harm. And we also know that campuses can make simple changes to help. Nationally, college campuses are experiencing a rise in queer students, faculty, and staff on their campuses. For students, nearing 20% of the college population, their numbers are expected to grow, as estimates put the number of LGBTQIA+ high school students above 10%. This is very important to note because the queer student population is victimized in a number of different ways, inside and outside of their homes, in sports, in their communities, in educational institutions, including before ever stepping foot on the college campus. For example, Rutgers Camden alarmingly found a 49% victimization rate for violence experienced by queer students prior to attending Rutgers University campus. Research historically and consistently documents the college campus as homophobic and transphobic, with high rates of harassment, physical violence, cyberbullying, and sexual assault against the LGBTQ+ student population that is higher than that of the general student population. One study reports that more than 75% of queer students say they have experienced sexual harassment at their college, and many reported they felt unsafe because of their gender identity and their sexual orientation. The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force conducted a large-scale survey across the country and found that 41% of students said their college or university was not doing enough to help them, not doing enough to address issues related to harm they were experiencing. These students fear for their physical safety because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And more than half of them say they hide their sexual orientation and gender identity to avoid harm. A recent campus climate survey at Rutgers University in Camden reports a 15% greater sexual assault rate for the queer population compared to the general student population. LGBTQ+ or queer students, they have distinct major stressors and reactions compared to other students because of the homophobia and the transphobia and the intolerance and the unsupportive environments and the violence that they face. These LGBTQ+ students nationally, according to research, report higher levels of mental health issues, including depression, feelings of invisibility, anxiety, and self-destructive behaviors, substance abuse, and in the greatest harm, suicide. As much of identity exploration and development, including the coming out process, occurs on the college campus, harmful campus environments might prevent these students from developing a positive self-identity and creating worse health outcomes. Homophobia, harassment, and violence also impact students in other ways, including academic performance, the decision not to live on campus, and the choice to drop out of school. Overall, queer students who experience victimization because of their gender or sexual identity have lower grade point averages, are more likely to miss school in comparison to other students, and they drop out at higher rates. Queer students also say they feel less of a sense of community on campus as opposed to other students. Students who experience fear and anxiety often decide not to live on campus, even further alienating them from peers. Because of the discrimination and violence they face before coming to college, transgender students are particularly vulnerable to harm because compared to other students, they often do not pursue higher education at all. Campuses need to both expand and advertise programming services and resources for this population. A campus survey conducted by gender studies students found that many queer students didn't even know that the campus had safety resources, had housing resources, had health resources. So even though campuses might have programs and services, getting this information into the hands of students is essential. Another approach could be to provide diversity training to everyone. This can include classroom instruction, syllabi creation, simple things to include housing initiatives, to include campus events and programming that address the harms associated with campus living and attending classes. These are things that are very simple. Campus-wide and community outreach is essential. Campuses can do so much, as I said. They can expand on what they have, they can advertise what they have, and they can generate new programs and services. The queer population is important, and they're growing, and campuses need to take their safety seriously. Thank you.